Adrenal insufficiency is rarely a simple one-size-fits-all diagnosis. Instead, it is a complex family of conditions tied together by a single critical problem. The body is not producing enough cortisol to meet its needs. When we look at the sheer variety of ways this manifests, from Addison's disease to secondary adrenal insufficiency or congenital adrenal hyperplasia, the most effective way to organize our understanding is by asking one central question: where is the signal breaking down?
That question is vital because the body's stress response is not just one organ acting alone. It is a high-stakes relay race involving the brain and the adrenal glands. We call this the HPA-axis. It starts in the hypothalamus, which releases a hormone called CRH. That signal travels to the pituitary gland, which then releases ACTH. Finally, ACTH reaches the adrenal glands sitting on top of the kidneys, telling them to pump out cortisol. If there is a breakdown at any step, the hypothalamus, the pituitary, or the adrenals themselves, you end up with adrenal insufficiency, but the cause determines everything about your treatment and long-term outlook.
And the implications of where that signal drops are profound. For instance, in primary adrenal insufficiency, or PAI, the breakdown happens at the very end of the line. The adrenal glands themselves are damaged or destroyed. Because the brain is still screaming for cortisol, the pituitary produces massive amounts of ACTH to try and jumpstart the system. That high ACTH is actually what causes the hyperpigmentation we often see in PAI. It is essentially a side effect of the brain oversignaling.
Exactly, and because the adrenal cortex is the physical site of the damage in PAI, you are usually losing more than just cortisol. You are also losing aldosterone, which is the hormone that regulates your salt and potassium levels. This is why people with Addison's disease, which is the autoimmune form of PAI, often deal with intense salt cravings and dangerous electrolyte imbalances. They have to replace both hormones, usually with hydrocortisone and a mineral corticoid like fludrocortisone. Without that second piece, their blood pressure and hydration levels can spiral out of control.
It is interesting that you mention Addison's as the most common cause of PAI in high-income countries, usually due to the immune system mistakenly attacking the adrenal cortex. But globally, the picture looks different. Infectious diseases like tuberculosis are still a leading cause of adrenal destruction. We also see PAI resulting from genetic conditions like X-linked adrenoleukodystrophy, which is especially important to screen for in males, or even from modern cancer treatments like immune checkpoint inhibitors that can trigger an autoimmune-like attack on the glands.
That is a great point about the checkpoint inhibitors because they illustrate how the signal can break down elsewhere too. They can cause hypophysitis, which is inflammation of the pituitary gland. When the pituitary is the problem, we call it secondary adrenal insufficiency, or SAI. Here, the adrenals are physically fine. They are like a car with a full tank of gas, but no one to turn the key. The pituitary isn't sending enough ACTH, so the adrenals just sit idle.
In SAI, the physiological profile shifts quite a bit. Since ACTH levels are low or inappropriately normal, you don't see the skin darkening. And crucially, because aldosterone production is mostly controlled by the kidneys through a different system called the RAAS, not by the pituitary, people with secondary AI usually don't need fludrocortisone. Their bodies can still manage salt and potassium fairly well. The focus is almost entirely on replacing that missing cortisol signal.
But that doesn't make it less serious. In fact, SAI is often part of a broader condition called hypopituitarism or panhypopituitarism, where the pituitary is failing to signal multiple systems. You might be missing growth hormone, thyroid-stimulating hormone, and sex hormones all at once. There's a critical safety rule here that every patient should know. You must address the cortisol deficiency before you start or increase thyroid hormone replacement. If you give thyroid hormone to someone with untreated adrenal insufficiency, it speeds up their metabolism and burns through whatever tiny bit of cortisol they have left, which can actually precipitate an adrenal crisis.
That is a terrifying but essential nuance. It highlights why the testing process is so precise. Doctors usually start with an early morning cortisol and ACTH draw. If that is inconclusive, they might move to an ACTH stimulation test, where they inject a synthetic version of the signal to see if the adrenals respond. But we have to be careful with the timing. If someone just developed a pituitary problem, their adrenals might still respond to the stim test because they haven't had time to atrophy yet. You could get a normal result for a signal problem that is very real.
Then we have the third level, tertiary adrenal insufficiency, or TAI, where the breakdown is at the hypothalamus. While this can happen from tumors or radiation, by far the most common cause is what we call iatrogenic, or steroid-induced. This happens when someone takes exogenous steroids like prednisone or dexamethasone for a long time. The brain sees all those synthetic steroids circulating and thinks, okay, we have plenty of cortisol, and it shuts down the production of CRH and ACTH. Over weeks or months, the HPA-axis essentially goes to sleep.
And the sleep can be deep. When you try to stop those steroids, the axis might not wake up immediately. For some, it takes weeks, for others it takes years, and for a few it never fully recovers. It is a common misconception that this only happens with oral pills. We see suppression from high-potency topical creams, inhaled steroids for asthma, and even repeated joint injections. It is all about the total load and the duration. That is why a gradual taper is so strictly managed by endocrinologists. You are trying to coax the signal back online without crashing the system.
We also have to talk about the genetic side, specifically congenital adrenal hyperplasia, or CAH. This isn't a signal failure from the brain, it's an internal manufacturing defect. Because of a missing enzyme, most commonly 21-hydroxylase, the adrenals can't complete the recipe for cortisol. The brain sees the low cortisol, sends out more ACTH signal, and the adrenals work harder and grow larger. That's the hyperplasia part, but they just end up shunting all that energy into making androgens instead.
That androgen excess creates a very different clinical journey. In classic salt-wasting CAH, a newborn might face a life-threatening crisis within days because they lack both cortisol and aldosterone. But then there is non-classic CAH, which might not be diagnosed until adulthood. These individuals might have enough cortisol for daily life, but struggle with symptoms of androgen excess, like severe acne or fertility issues, and they may only need steroid support during times of intense illness or stress.
It really underscores why the symptoms are so difficult to pin down initially. Whether it's PAI, SAI, or CAH, the downstream result, cortisol deficiency, looks remarkably similar. You have the crushing fatigue, the brain fog, muscle aches, and low blood pressure. These symptoms overlap with so many other things: thyroid issues, anemia, POTS, even menopause. This is why diagnosis isn't just one blood test, it's the synthesis of the whole clinical picture and very specific timing.
It's also why the community aspect is so vital. When you tell someone you have adrenal insufficiency, they might assume you just need a pill and you're fine. But the reality is that living with an invisible, life-threatening condition is deeply disruptive. You are constantly managing your energy, your salt, and your stress levels. Understanding your specific type, knowing if it's an adrenal failure, a pituitary issue, or a genetic condition, helps you advocate for yourself. It helps you ask the right questions, like, do I need to check my renin levels? Or, is my thyroid replacement safe right now?
That's exactly why resources like the My Adrenal Life community exist. Rick Dissler, the founder, started this because he saw how much confusion there was around these nuances. He has written a series of books specifically to bridge the gap between complex medical facts and the lived experience of these conditions. Titles like Understanding and Managing Adrenal Insufficiency and Energy Failure and Post-Exertional Collapse deal with the very real, very difficult symptoms that often get brushed over in a 10-minute doctor's visit.
If you're looking for those resources, the best way to find them is to search for Rick Dissler directly on Amazon, as searching for My Adrenal Life doesn't always show the full range of his work. There is also the Adrenal Insufficiency Daily Tracker, which can be a game changer for people trying to figure out their patterns and triggers. Following him on Amazon is a good way to stay updated when he releases new titles, which he does frequently to cover systems like the cardiovascular or nervous system in the context of AI.
And beyond the books, there is the My Adrenal Life Facebook group. It's a space where people with all different types of AI can find validation. It's a place to realize that even if your journey looks different from someone with Addison's because you have secondary AI, the underlying challenge of living without a functional stress response is something you share. That validation is often as important as the medication itself.
Ultimately, the goal is empowerment through understanding. Learning about the HPA-axis and your specific breakdown point doesn't replace your medical team, but it does make the conversation less overwhelming. It turns a scary, invisible diagnosis into something you can map out and manage. It takes time to peel back the layers of these conditions, and that's okay. You are essentially learning a new language for how your body functions.
It's a journey of layers, one specialist visit, one lab result, and one community conversation at a time. The more you know about where the signal is breaking down, the better you can navigate the path forward, whether that means managing your salt intake, monitoring other pituitary hormones, or working through a long-term steroid taper.
We hope this deep dive helps clarify the why behind the testing and the how of the different types of adrenal insufficiency. Remember, this information is for educational purposes and should always be discussed with your endocrinology team. If you found this explanation helpful, please share it with someone else who might be navigating their own diagnosis or supporting a loved one on this journey.